Gather round and you shall hear the bullshit life of Paul Revere's fucking guy.
History, I'd like to follow me down the rabbit hole. History, I'd like to, frankly, I want to know.
Hi, welcome to HILF, History I'd Like to Fuck with Dawn Brody. I'm Dawn Brody, and I'm glad to have you in the den. That's the Deluxe Edition Network. To find more great podcasts in the den, click the link in our show notes or go to deluxeeditionnetwork.com. Now, this HILF features one of the most formative moments in American history, the Boston Massacre. 1770, when a cluster of British soldiers fired into a civilian crowd in Boston, killing 5. Right before the Tea Party, before the Declaration of Independence, America had her first shooting. Now, it took place over 250 years ago, but it has so many hallmarks of our modern day. Victim exploitation, media spin, courtroom drama, and of course, a surprise ending. To thank for this HILF are the co-hosts of the hit sports podcast, In a Pickle Radio. Dave Houghton and Sarah Retalic join me to get nasty with some founding daddies. Let's get started.
You know what the best part about the massacre is now?
What?
It's now a great tourist trap where people sell you discounted garbage.
Yes.
Great.
So it's very American.
Your podcast is so cool. In a Pickle Radio, I've listened. Here's what I love about it. You guys do sports, you do culture, you do a little history.
Mm-hmm.
You give us the context. I feel like if you are on the nerd spectrum, leaning more towards like history, but you really want to be able to talk to a sports nerd around the dip at the next party, I think In a Pickle Radio will segue you nicely into the sports nerds.
Yeah, our whole show is basically the less glamorous side of sports because, I mean, what you see and what you read is always like, you know, the rah-rah good stuff. And it's just like, you can't have everything be roses. There's got to be some shit that grows out of it.
Well, and you guys do a great job of like going into the annals of sports history to like every now and again you bring up a good old fashioned one, but you're cutting your ripped from the headlines. You guys can bring this stuff right now to the like, hey, this might be buried because it doesn't do great for like jersey sales.
Right.
Or the memory of a recently
absolutely.
retired athlete that we'd all like to believe is doing really well, but actually has been found naked wandering around a golf course. We just want to let you know.
Yeah, that's what's going on.
It shows you what happens after sports as well. You know, sometimes you get hit in the head too many times and then drive your car off the road and wander around with your pants around your ankles. I mean, it happens.
Yeah. It's a typical Friday night for us.
Well, it's like, I mean, it's the whole thing. We watch for the peaks and the valleys, man.
Right. Absolutely.
Is that why you guys started this podcast? Because you have sort of a shared love of the flip side of the coin?
So I had started this podcast about 3 years earlier with another friend of mine. And we were doing just baseball. And we were doing stories of like, players who had it all and then lost it due to like, you know, drugs, alcohol, whatever. And then when he left the show, I kind of started doing it myself and it just wasn't as good as there was no banter. So it was kind of lame. Episodes were only about 15, 16 minutes because how much do I want to talk about something, you know? And Sarah, being my biggest supporter through all those years, I kind of tricked her into coming onto the show once. And then I made her sign a contract where she can never leave. And then we kind of just turned the show into like crazy, messed up headlines in sports. And then every so often we'll sprinkle in a little like fuckery. You know,
I love that. My favorite word.
Little story, little history. This month, this person did this, and went to trial, and if you didn't know, is in jail and is
And
dead.
is dead.
In December, we're doing a story about Joey Pepitone. He played for the Yankees, and he wrapped his car around a pole. He's been DUI'd a bunch of times. He posed in Playgirl. I mean, all that stuff. So
nice.
We just like to find the most randomest athlete and maybe just tell everything about them during or after their sports.
Oh, it's great. And fans of your show will know this already, but you guys have a really great, fun rapport. You do make the banter so cool and fun, and it makes sense to me now. So, Sarah, you are a fan turned co-host. Is that right?
Yes. And Dave and I have been friends. We went to high school together. So we've known each other for 20 some odd years, and we've had the same banter from then to now, where it's like, I do want to fight you, but somewhere in my heart, I do love you, so it's a brother-sister relationship that makes it thrive.
That's great. And you guys
really
are geographically you're far apart. Dave, you are in Chicago, and Sarah, you're in Boston.
No.
Is that right?
No, we're both in Boston.
No,
you're both in Boston.
We're like 20 minutes from each other.
We actually live 20 minutes from each other, but we don't.
20 minutes.
We don't want to meet up and hang out.
Listen, that's a very LA thing to do. That's
too much.
But you want to know the truth. My sister, Lisa, lives in Boston, and it's the worst driving experience I've ever had in my life. And I quickly remind her from the passenger seat, as a 10+ year resident of Los Angeles, that her city's the worst. I was like, LA sucks. Like, you sit in your car in LA a lot too, but you have 8 lanes going everywhere. And you're sitting in your car, but you're going at least 40 miles an hour, and you can get off this freeway and take at least 5 or 6 other fairly good routes. I feel like I sit in my sister's fucking minivan to take, her kids 20 minutes. She says it's going to take 20 minutes. And all of a sudden we're in the Blair Witch Project. And I'm like, what is happening? We are in the middle of the woods. There is nothing but woods and like 2 lanes. And she's like, this is the only way to get to Bingham or Hanover, Binghamshire, or whatever the fuck it's called. And I'm like, that's the only way? This is the only way. Humans, this state has been here since the beginning, and y'all have this one road there. And she goes,
the thing that you don't get about Boston is we still have the same roads from the Boston Massacre era, where you could just still operate your horse and buggy down the road instead of your car.
Yeah. And it's just as narrow as it was then now. So trying to get down streets, you're most likely going to be in a collision with someone who has no idea where they are.
So there's what you're saying is the Boston Massacre continues daily on the roads.
Every day. Every day.
Every day.
So my research led me wrong on you two. I thought I was discussing the Boston Massacre with a single Bostonian, but here I am, talking the Boston Massacre to 2 Bostonians. I'm clenched. I'm a little clenched. I feel like the pressure's on. I should have smoked more weed. I would have loosened up.
No, it's okay. We'll just get you drunk before we go in.
Well, this is awesome, man. Dave and Sarah, the question, right? What is going to be your history subject? And y'all dangle your toes over, history stuff all the time. And Dave said, Sarah really wants to do the Boston Massacre. And so now is my chance to ask you, Sarah, why? Why was this the one you picked for us?
So geographically, we learned about it in school, and all well and good. However, as you get older and you get a little bit more curious as to like the truth behind it and the truth of what's going on, you're like, oh, this public school lied to me. Like, where's the funding? Like, let's get some better books. But not just that, but also it kind of portrays how it is in Massachusetts. It's a like kind of fuck around and find out situation where, we are always, we don't want you there. We're going to throw snowballs at you. We don't want you there. We're going to throw rocks at you. So it's one of those that it does portray the tried and true Bostonian today. So I was like, this is a great segue for us.
Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you picked it.
I'm gonna tell you a story. I'm gonna tell you about my town.
Here are some of the sources that will supply what is coming down the pike. This book was my first source. It's called The Boston Massacre, A Family History by the author Serena Zabin. And one of the things that makes this history account unique is that she focuses on the families and lives around both the perpetrators and the victims. She discusses how the British regiments came from Britain often with their families, their wives and their kids, came on the ships, lived in the barracks, were responsible for cleaning and mending and taking care of the soldiers. And they were sort of, depending on the perspective, they were a burden, one more mouth to feed, or they were a great service. They actually provided stuff that we didn't have to hire anybody for. And the number of British soldiers who married American women and were deeply like intertwined in the colonies, like from the beginning. So like, wow, was that fun, kind of kinky. And then look, I got to back up to get this book into frame. It's one very exciting one.
Holy shit.
Yeah, it's hardcover, girl. This is called Reporting the Revolutionary War, and it is sort of like, remember microfiche when we were little? And you had to go with the thing, and like if you watch a crime drama from the 90s, they still will have like, you know, Julia Roberts doing some shit with the microfiche. Right. It is the actual newspaper reports from the newspapers published the week of. So this guy got as many existing contemporary reporting in and around the major events of the Revolutionary War and printed and transcribes them into this book, meaning you can read the sort of daily, weekly mail. You can see how a particular publication changes its mind, kind of like they do now, you know, in the editorial page. Mm-hmm. It was really, it's wild. That was incredibly illuminating. There is, of course, innumerable documentaries. I really liked one on the History Channel called The American Rebellion BREWS in Boston. There's several episodes, but that first episode just really kind of gets into what you were saying, Sarah. Like, why are these cunts so prone to getting snowballs all of a sudden? Like, why is that their thing? I did watch the miniseries on HBO of the biography that I had already read years ago. The John Adams miniseries on HBO with Paul Giamatti playing John Adams. Gorgeous. Laura Linney plays Abigail.
Oh, she's so phenomenal.
Right?
God, I was like, I'm gonna marry you. Like, God, like, yes.
And
amazing.
like, can we not, Sarah, you and I have like a double feature night where we watch like episode of John Adams, episode of Ozark, episode of John Adams, episode, right? Like powerful wife who is here for you. Sometimes it's good. And we'll call it like peanut butter and jelly, you know, like Laura Linney and our little like yummy wives sandwich. Okay.
See,
Dave,
this
you
is
can
exactly,
watch. We'll zoom you in, Dave.
Yeah, this is exactly how I pictured this episode to go today. Don, I really love your show. It's great.
Thank you.
But I reached out to you to do this episode more for Sarah. This is like her Christmas gift. I am the person sitting in the cuck chair watching the two of you scissor history.
Ooh, kinky.
Yeah. This is, I knew exactly how this was going to be. And if you don't hear my voice a lot, I didn't fall asleep. I'm paying attention. I just knew exactly how this is going to be.
I'm so glad you're being a voyeur.
You honestly, you don't need me here. I'm just on the side. Oh, dude, I'm in the cuck chair. It's cool.
Oh, listen, everybody needs a towel boy in a good orgy. Yes. Like, don't you dare leave the room. You are part of this.
No. I'm not leaving. I'm watching. Trust me.
Yeah, okay, good. We'll throw you a courtesy hand job at some point. He's absolutely right though. Like Sarah's wearing like an ironic history T-shirt of like Titanic swim team, which I love. Yep. I'm wearing I tend to get historical T-shirt, get it? Play on words. Hysteria. Oh boy. Uh-oh.
Wilds. Get the lotion in the water. Everybody get hydrated.
And if you get hot for sources, there's more. I mean, I usually read a book. You guys know, you've heard the show. I usually read at least one book, watch a documentary or two. Sister. There was also a 3-part podcast series called Benjamin Franklin's World.
Oh, that's a wild world.
Benjamin
Where the hell do you find all this time?
I know. I do it while. I'm kind of, I do it while, but this Benjamin Franklin's world, this lady she talks to historians from all over the place. It's remarkable. They get into fact and fiction. They get into before and after, victims and perpetrators. It's hot. So here's what I've done with all of that. In addition to getting thoroughly turned on and then assembling a menage a trois. Here's my plan for us going in. Okay, my intent is to get the three of us just really fully immersed in Boston 1770. How grateful I am that you two are already very familiar with Boston today. Therefore, right? So to go back to 1770, because as we said, it is more colorful and it is more complicated than I remember. And usually, for those of us who sort of are trying to harken back, Boston Massacre, okay, getting an image. The image, if you have one, if you haven't seen John Adams' series on HBO, is that engraving, the image, the one that was in all of our textbooks that is usually attached, to the title, and it's the one, if you can't see it, it's the good guys are in blue, they are bleeding, they are being victimized. We have the bad guys in red. They're sort of leaning into their bayonets while they're firing, and their faces are very obviously like, oh, we fucking love killing these guys. and there's like a little dog, and it's sort of like this is, and then you see that image and you read the paragraph or two about the massacre that says that was the beginning of the fight, and then we fought, and then we won, and now we're America, and America is and will always be perfect. Yes.
Check.
And we did it. So we're gonna try, and what I think we're gonna play a little trivia. I'm gonna give you guys trivia questions along the way, Dave. So not only will you be brought into this, Dave, you gotta compete. I know. Stretch, limber up. I know. But listen, before all that, let's color in the lines here with a story. On October 15th in 1768 in Farmington. Do you guys know you place yourself in Farmington? Do you know where that is in relationship to Boston?
Yes. I do. It's about a 2-hour drive from here, maybe about
2.5
2.5 hours.
Yeah.
2.5.
All right, so a distance, certainly before cars, it'd be a nice distance outside of town, right? And there's this guy named Richard Ames, and he's working in a cornfield in Farmington. And this guy was born in England, and he came to America earlier that year with the 14th Regiment, and then he fucking deserted. He was like, this is for the fucking bird. And he took off, and he wasn't the only one. There were so many desertions in that 17 months that the British soldiers were first coming over and sort of assembling troops. So many guys like Richard Ames were like, fuck no. And they bolted. And it was really easy to desert. In fact, on the day that this guy deserted, 20 other guys deserted. It wasn't like an organized thing. They all were just done. Like, I'm out. And it was really easy. And one of the reasons it was easy to desert is because they were housed all over hell. They were all over Boston. They didn't have the centralized military barracks where all of the British soldiers were going to be staying. When they got to Boston, it was like a few in this farmhouse, a few in that barracks, some out of town. So they were really dispersed. And so it was pretty easy to just wander off, right? This is also peacetime. They're technically here as peacekeepers. They're not here to fight. So this isn't like organized military barracks sharpening their weapons and making sure everyone's got the strategy for the day. They're just hanging out a lot.
Smoking Marlboros, drinking Bud Lights.
Yeah. And it also sucked, right? Being a British soldier was the worst. Your officers treated you like trash. There were regular beatings. And then the people hate you too, because nobody likes a peacekeeper. Why are you here? Why are you pointing that gun at me? I hate your guts. So yeah. The other thing was, if you were a British soldier who had lived in London and you were poor and treated like garbage, and you step off the boat in Boston and look around at the life of colonial America, you're like, well, this is heaven. This is, look at all the clean water and clean air and space and grass. What is this green, delicious stuff growing out of the ground? My God. Are these, you know what I'm talking about? Are those blue skies? This is amazing. And then the one that really sealed the deal, Sarah, you can attest, is the women. Yes. Us. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Ladies.
They're crazy, but
yeah, they'll rip your dick off, but you'll fucking
they're crazy,
love it.
But they're down. Yeah. Yeah, you'll love every minute of it.
Absolutely. So our guy, Richard Ames, is standing in this cornfield in Farmington on a crisp October morning, probably just patting himself on the back like, God damn, did I nail this one, right? And then he sees old Farmer Ames, which is crazy. They have the same last name. History cannot confirm or deny that they were actually related, but that's crazy, right? Farmer Ames is walking across the field and he's got these two guys with him. And he comes up to Richard and is like, check it out, 2 more deserters. Do you know him? He's like, I don't know him. But they like up high. Am I right, guys? This is the best thing. This is the best thing we've ever done. And these two guys are like, honestly. And then Farmer Ames is like, fucking A, let's go get some cider and take a break. And
That's
like,
the most New England thing to say, though. Be like, hey, these guys are from England. You know these fucking dudes over here?
Like, oh, yeah.
You know?
Five.
Yeah, and they're
top.
all just like, fucking A, this is the best day ever. And now we're going to go toast to our great decisions with this farmer and his cider. Amen. And they get into the farmer's house and they cheers with the cider. And then these two guys pull pistols. Oh, fuck. They're deserter hunters. Shit. And they had pretended to be deserters and were hot on the trail, trying to track down all these guys. And they caught Richard and they take him into custody and they drag his ass back to Boston. And all of the, the powers that be are like, yeah, we got to come down on this guy. He's court-martialed, found guilty, and sentenced to execution by firing squad.
Yikes.
And not just firing squad of his own unit. The 14th that he defected from, they're going to be the ones that are going to do the shooting. And the colonials are they've seen, by the way, already lashings that killed a guy. It peeled his back, it destroyed his body, and he died. They saw other ones, and even the colonials were like, the Bible says that 40 is sufficient. I just feel like maybe we could stop at 40 lashes,
And back then, I mean, you would die from a stubbed toe, too.
Word.
So,
right.
Yeah.
But these guys, like, no, there's too many desertions. We've got to make an example of this guy. And despite the protests and letters and just please take it easy on this guy, they shoot him dead and then march 3 times around his body. Like, take a look, guys. Here is the reason I tell this story at the very top. One, to point out, as the author of this book does so beautifully, that our fight was not with the redcoats. Our fight was with the red coat itself. We could and often did separate the men from their uniforms. That's why we're fucking marrying them and taking them in as deserters. And there are tons of examples of British soldiers. Again, they're only there for 17 months and they are godfathers to colonial babies. They are going into business with people. Like, at that moment, we're all English and we're all subjects of the king. And we don't exactly know kind of what's happening. A lot of these lines are yet, you know what I mean, to be drawn. But when we saw the brutality of the king on his own subjects, not just his own subjects, but the brutality of the king on his own soldiers, it further reinforced, why would we want to be subjects of this king? How is this a great pitch for join up, right? So I feel like this understanding of the execution of Richard Ames in 1768, which is 2 years before the Boston Massacre, gives us some of that important like color that we were talking about, right? It also brings us to our first question. I know.
Oh, boy.
Now, some of these questions I will be directing to one or the other of you. In this case, you both answer, and whoever gets the closest will get the point. Okay. The city of Salem, Massachusetts, and Boston are only 25 miles apart, and they are, of course, both sites of a dark chapter in American history. But how many years separate the Salem witch trials from the Boston Massacre? How many years?
Shit. It's like 100. Ooh. It's probably about like I want to say it's like 110.
Okay, Sarah says 110 years. Whoever gets closest wins. Dave, what do you think?
I feel like it's lower. I want to say like it's in the 40s, 40 years-ish.
Dave, you win this one. It is 70 years prior.
I try to avoid Salem at all
That's-
costs
gosh.
anyway. So I mean, all I know is they have a Bewitched statue that everybody just takes pictures
Well,
of.
it's Elizabeth
Of course.
Montgomery. Let's call it a day. It says,
take a picture with that.
but
And this is one of the cool things about knowing that context. Be like, okay, the Salem witch trials were about as far away from the events in Boston during the Boston Massacre as you and I are from the World War II.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a good. Yeah.
Also, to give you an indication of how many generations of people have been Americans. Still associated themselves, of course, as subjects of the king, but have occupied this space and raised children and generations. And our graveyards have generations of families now buried in them, out on that hill.
Right.
So more to our context is the 7 Years' War. This happened 7 years prior to the Boston Massacre, and I think is super duper important to understand why the Boston Massacre happened and why Bostonians still love throwing rocks and snowballs at people who piss them off. And it's basically the last fight for who gets to own the colonies, France or England, right? And Native American tribes aligned with various powers, and colonial Americans, for the most part, aligned with England and fought together. And that means you got dudes like George Washington, who was carrying an English gun and wearing English boots and fighting along these English guys against France. Most of the Sons of Liberty held an English gun and fought under the English flag next to an English guy 7 years ago. Not just generation, like this was really, really recent, right? And at the end of the 7 Years' War, England is so fucking exhausted, fucking finally got America. Phew. And they are beyond broke. They're so broke. They don't have any money, and they don't have any more dudes. They have, scraped the bottom of the barrel for guys. As they are saying themselves, we just have the worst dudes in the army right now. We are completely out of money. Our ships suck. This is just the worst. And what we have to do now, the primo first job, is to tax these motherfuckers and make up for some of the money that we just bled out to keep them colonies English, right? And the colonists were like, no.
Nah, dude.
yeah,
Nah, dude, we're good.
nah.
We
No.
didn't. I
No.
mean, there were so many. Generally, the thrust of it was just nah. And they'd be like, but we just fought to keep you. And we were like, no, we didn't see it like that.
It's more like that's
Classic.
nice. However,
Boston.
and like that's
Yeah, classic Boston. We didn't like.
Yeah.
We
Oh,
both
good.
didn't like the French.
Yeah.
That
I didn't ask you
seems
to
to
fucking
me-
do this
Yeah.
for me. I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
Go fucking do your
Yeah.
own thing. Yeah.
Yeah, send me an invoice. I'll take a
Yeah.
look. I mean, it was,
Yeah.
and also exactly right, Dave. That was really how they did it. There wasn't immediate nah, and that was about as violent as it was. It was just nah, and the form of the nah was smuggling, which is the technique. You know what I mean? They were
Yeah.
just saying no, we're not going to do it, and we're just not. And so they'd be like, oh right, so every time you use a piece of paper, you give us 5 cents, right? And we just wouldn't.
Nah.
Just didn't.
Nah.
Just
I'm good.
didn't send it.
Got right on my hands.
Or
yeah.
they'd go like
yeah.
this. This is my favorite. The way that I used to disobey my mom is I'd go, okie doke, and then not do it. It's just the difference. The action is the same, but the answer was some variety between nah and all right. But either way, they weren't getting them taxes. And every time the ledger came in, they were like, son of a bitch, this doesn't line up. We sent this much, we got this much. There's no way. So to enforce, the first thing they do, of course, is they're like, perhaps they're just not very good at math. Maths, the idiots. So then they send, right? And they send a bunch of guys thinking maybe the problem is we ain't doing the math.
Yeah, math
Math
is
is
hard.
hard. Yeah.
Math is
And
hard.
they send up buildings,
It's
like
really
we'll do
hard.
buildings in this math. And you know what? Don't worry, we'll do the math for you, so you guys don't have to do the math. That's so hard for you. And then they were like, yeah, no, it really seems like they are deliberately not paying these taxes. That's so weird. Then we get into rough scuffles. Just fuck you. All right. Nah goes to fuck nah. You know, and
The fuck
things are
outta
getting
here,
tested.
dude.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so in 1768, they send troops, lots of them, to Boston specifically. This is a Boston thing. This is an American thing. When the enforcer arrives to just keep an eye on things, all of us want to throw something at that person.
Absolutely.
We won't like, nobody
Yes.
likes it.
Yeah.
My daughter is 5 and they have a substitute teacher and she's like, fuck this. No, you're not my teacher. I mean it. It was just yesterday. I was like, how's the substitute? And she was like, I don't know, because I don't do that. That's not my teacher. And she doesn't make the rules. And I was like, oh no. You
I
know.
don't know. She got an eraser off the head today. You know?
So I threw, and she didn't duck, and that was on her because I wound up. She could see it coming. So the troops come, and that just gets everybody real uptight. Okay, so where we come into our story, the Boston Massacre. Here we are at the beginning of 1770. It's been 2 years, give or take, a year and a half since the execution of Richard Ames. So more troops are coming. We don't like you. We don't like the way you treat your troops. We don't like the way your troops treat us. And if you are a private, a sentry, a redcoat that is supposed to stand guard on shit in Boston, this is the shittiest job, you guys. Because the way the power structure works, it's so fucked. Everyone's trying to simultaneously start a war and prevent a war, that we have these moments where there's this eerie inaction while all of this stuff builds. So if you're wearing a red coat and you're standing guard somewhere in Boston and a Bostonian walks by and goes, hey, you ugly fuck, we hate that you're here. And you're thinking, God, I want to smack this guy with my gun. Big time. You obviously can't. You ask an officer. You say, hey, officer, these fucks are scaring me and they're being really mean to me. Can I hit them, please, with the butt of my gun? And then your officer says, hang on, let me ask the commander, right? So the officer then goes to Gates, right? And says, hey, Gates out there on your ship overseeing everything, they're being mean and we'd really like to start hitting them with our butt of our gun. What do you think? And he says, we can't do anything unless the local magistrate gives us leave to do it. So we have to check in with him. So then they check in with the local magistrate, who technically works for the king, but is elected by the people of Boston. So he can't. Anyway, he's got 2 bosses and he just goes, I would really rather you didn't. And at the end of enough of these chains of command, and everybody seeing how long this chain of command in and how at the end it always leads to inactivity, emboldens otherwise weak and ineffectual individuals to just go for these redcoats because they know they can't do anything about it. There is no recourse for them, and they can just sort of express themselves. And they are starting to do that. And it had already come a month before the Boston Massacre. An 11-year-old boy fucked around and found out while protesting at the home of a loyalist. His name is Christopher Sider, and he's murdered. He's beaten and dies from his injuries. And that was already one that people were starting, that got heart rates up, that got people clenching their fists and like raising sticks a little higher. So on the evening of March 5th, 1770, this is 11 days after the funeral of that 11-year-old boy. So he and thousands of people came out to the funeral of this 11-year-old boy. And so tensions are high. This private Hugh White is stationed outside the Boston Custom House where they do the math and collect the taxes inside. And so this is the place. It's like, if you're going to pick a place that really makes you mad, that's the building, right? It's on King Street near the water. And while he's on guard, he sees a 13-year-old boy named Edward Garrick, kind of having words with this British officer named Goldfinch. He's basically saying, he's a Whig. He's like, you didn't pay your bill, you fucking British fuck, kind of deal, right? And Goldfinch, and they're getting at it. And Private Hugh White approaches them and says, you, son, shouldn't be talking like that. And they get into a fight. And then Hugh White hits our guy Garrick, the 13-year-old boy, in the head with the butt of his gun, which we've all established. And so he does kind of hit the kid, fuck, and then goes back to his post, like, fuck, sorry.
Oh dear.
Yes.
I believe I hit that chap with the butt of me gun.
Yeah. Ooh, I hope nobody noticed, right?
Oh, fuck.
And I like...
Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious.
Don't cry.
Don't be suspicious.
Yeah, right.
That's right. Yeah. But it is, I picture this moment, especially after reading all of these various accounts, like from both sides. I picture this moment like a zombie movie where like it's late at night, it's kind of cold, and everyone just sort of like a whiff of brains has come into the graveyard. And all of the various individuals awake at the time are like, fight. Right? Which again, as residents of Boston, I think you know that smell, that moment when people just start to go, I want to punch somebody. Where is it? And they start to move. And it's slow by all accounts. They start to just gather around Private Hugh White with like, you fucking hit that kid. He hit me. Did he shoot the kid? And we're starting to get mad. And enough of a crowd is gathering that Hugh White is like, I'm so scared. And he calls for reinforcements. And you get Captain Thomas Preston comes in with a bunch of other soldiers. They're ultimately make a horseshoe kind of semicircle shape, guarding the custom house with their bayonets aimed out at this growing crowd that's just getting madder and madder. Again, we do not know. History cannot confirm exactly how many people were there, where exactly everybody was, but everyone agrees that at one point, church bells started ringing. And if church bells start ringing when it ain't church time, that typically means, get out here. There's a problem. And usually that means, get out here. Shit's going down. And usually it's a fire. And it's so often the shit that's going down is a fire that like people are going to like get water. And then they're like, there's no fire. But they keep hearing the word fire. The word fire, fire, to the point where people are thinking there is one, you know? What we know is at some point, Private Montgomery is hit by something, a club, a rock. It's hard enough in his head that he falls to the ground and drops his rifle. Some people said it went off when he dropped it. Some people say he stood up with it and said, fire, fire, goddammit, fire, and started firing himself. Probably because if you just got hit with the head and then you're on your belly, there becomes a certain fight or flight reflex, right?
Right.
At that point, bang, 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 bang. The shots ring out. And here is my second question. And this one is to you, Sarah, since Dave has already gotten 1 point. And I know you're eager to get on the board. True or false? All of the people who died in the Boston Massacre were shot.
That's a false. Is that false?
Ooh, unfortunately, it is true. They were all shot.
Oh, God damn.
That doesn't mean Dave got a point, though. At least you didn't give him anything.
I would have said false as well, because when fights break out in Boston, most of the time, Bostonians hit other Bostonians just for shits and giggles.
Just
you know?
Just for shits and giggles.
Yeah.
May as well add my blood to the mix. Are we making?
You could be fighting the British, but you know what? At one point, I'm going to hit my best friend just because. Why not?
He probably did something in third grade. How's it coming?
At the end, you go to the bar and you have yourself a beer, and you're like, fuck, man, I'm sorry I hit you. I was just really
I'll
caught
do
up
it
in a
again, though,
moment."
probably.
Yeah. Yeah, you get me next time we do one of these meet and greets at the old colony house there.
Yeah.
You know,
I'll give you a second. I'll turn my back. You go ahead and take one. I'll expect it. No, they were all shot, and I was really shocked by that too.
Yeah.
The only reason I sort of led you for like why false is because one of the guys who died, it was a ricochet. So he wasn't shot directly, but he did die from a bullet wound. From a ricocheted bullet. But yeah, they were all shot. And here are the victims and how they died from what we know. We had a rope maker named Samuel Gray, hot. We had a mariner named James Caldwell, hotter. We had a previously enslaved man named Crispus Attucks. We will talk a lot more about him a little bit later on. A 17-year-old boy named Samuel Maverick. He's the one who died the next day because it was a ricocheting bullet that hit him. He was in the back, poor bastard. And then an Irish immigrant named Patrick Carr, and he dies 2 weeks later from his bullet wounds. But that's 5 dead. 5. The
Wow.
Boston Massacre, had 5 dead. I don't want to say that Americans are overachievers, but our massacres got way better after that.
Yeah.
But you can imagine how once those bullets start flying, I mean, granted, they don't have automatic rifles, but there is a moment where there's like the bullets stop firing. The colonials are not armed, of course. And there's just that eerie, like, what happens now? There's people dead and dying. There's people screaming. The soldiers are bleeding, many of them from the shit that was hitting them in the face, but they're holding ranks and they are in that line and their guns are still drawn and everyone's just fucking staring at each other. What the fuck? Eventually, the acting governor, Thomas Hutchinson, gets down there. They disperse. The crowd starts to disperse. This cunt gets on a balcony like Evita. and he's still English, right? So he's like, right, everyone, that was so unfortunate. Please go home. And there's a lot of argument. And finally, the crowd is like, not until this, not until that. And he eventually says, all right, look. Those 8 guys who were standing here who fired, we've arrested them. And the captain, they're under arrest. They are in jail. We will put them on trial for murder. And the rest of these soldiers who are currently in Boston are going to go out there to Castle Island for a little while until everybody calms the fuck down. All right? So we're going to mourn the dead. We're going to tend to the injured. Everybody just go on home, okay? And they do.
I love the way you explain that when after the shots were fired, everyone's just standing there looking at each other. I could just picture it. That's why I was over here laughing, because you just picture it like in a movie where the shots are fired, there's people on the ground, everyone's just staring at each other, and then all of a sudden this fight song breaks out and all hell breaks loose.
Yeah,
you know?
right? Well, and you got to know, too, this is one of those moments, man. If we could get into a time machine, that moment is the one on which a lot of this shit actually turned, right? Because the crowd could have beaten those guys to death, probably, before anyone else came. Like,
well, back then it took forever to reload your weapon anyways.
Right. And
So,
the court
I mean-
documents revealed they didn't reload. No soldiers shot more than once. But yeah, it wasn't like the custom house was full of more soldiers. It's not clear that anyone would have gotten the order to go down there and start killing the people who had taken the custom house. Like, this could have been yet another crazy chapter. But yeah, in those deep breaths, Dave, there was an opportunity for people to go, stop. Like, we have to go home tonight. Let's, and already sort of leaning on a justice system that is very complicated, right? And it is the system that we're going to get into when we come back for part 2.
This podcast is part of the Deluxe Edition Network. To find other great shows on the network, head over to deluxeeditionnetwork.com. That's deluxeeditionnetwork.com. In a world where podcasts have become bland and stale, one podcast dares to stand above. Barrel Age Flicks Podcast.
We're reviewing drinks,
breaking down movies, busting each other's balls. And we're big in Hong Kong.
Barrel Age Flicks Season 4. It's in the bottle.
yeah, available on Spotify, Apple Music, Audible, iHeartRadio, TikTok, YouTube, Patreon, and OnlyFans.
I know a massacre isn't supposed to be this much fun, but can you blame us? And we all just poured ourselves a drink too, so buckle up. And you know, as long as I'm holding a glass, a toast to my latest patrons, Megan B. and Marcus A. Oh, I am so grateful to them, and you should be too, because these sluts, all right, along with my other fabulous patrons, you know who you are, hi, not only help keep the podcast cooking, but prevent me from having to schlep boner pills and home security systems to you between hilfing, right? And if you want to help, but like not with money, I get it. We are at HILF Podcast everywhere. All right, you can give us a huge shot in the arm by subscribing, reviewing, sharing your favorite episode. And of course, when you
follow me, follow me, follow me, follow. Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow.
I'm gonna cut you. I'm gonna cut you and gut you, and frickin' we're gonna have a good old fancy time.
Oh.
Now I'm drinking, so.
I was hoping, yeah, I know. It's like, it's always difficult when you've got these various time zones to be like, I hope you understand that I do drink early in the morning, but it's for you. So that we all feel like we're in the same place. What have you got? What are we?
I'm
What are
into,
we
like,
enjoying?
drinking.
Yeah, I've been on a
drinking a
seltzer
seltzer?
kick. I know, that's what everybody says
Hike
to
up your
me.
skirt, little lady. Jesus.
Yeah. Even
Fuck, what is wrong with you? Change your tampon.
Come on,
Yeah.
let him.
it's 2023. I can drink whatever I want. Okay? I can identify as a cucumber if I need to.
Whatever.
Especially for the two of you.
Good for you. Good for you. You are our favorite cucumber, Dave. We are back. We are even less clothed. We are a little more intoxicated. And our guys, where we left our guys, man, between March 5th, the shooting itself, and October of 1770, where we find them now, these 9 guys have just been sitting in jail. And one of the things that they are particularly terrified of is getting lynched. Thomas Preston, the captain in particular, his letters are adamant that he's pretty much figures every day is his last. These guys are going to get in here eventually. They're going to drag him out. One of the guards is going to get bribed, and it has happened before. And Thomas Preston is Irish. So the only thing that Bostonians know better than Boston is being Irish and just being like, I don't know what's going to take over first, them being Irish or them being Bostonian, but they're going to fucking kill me in here, right?
True.
And now it's time to talk about that engraving. Okay, so we talked at the beginning about how that's like the image that we all have. You guys can picture in your mind, right? The image I'm talking about.
Yes, you can see it.
Bam, right? For anybody in the colonies at that time, certainly by October, they done seen that engraving. For those of you who maybe can't picture it perfectly, you've got your line of red-coated soldiers, right, in them bayonets. You've got the victims, the bleeding, Bostonians. In the backdrop is a huge church, right, indicating these are saintly, godly people of Boston that were killed in front of, their own church. There's a cute little helpless dog. It's not dead, but it's in the foreground. I don't know why the dog is there. And it's vivid. Now, here is my question, Sarah, as you have 0.
Jesus.
I know there is.
Oh my God.
And you know what? This one, I'm going to ask you, Sarah, but if you get it wrong, I will give Dave a chance to steal this point. It seems only fair. Here's the question about that engraving that we all know so well. Sarah, who made it?
Oh,
wow.
Fuck. Oh my God.
Who's the artiste?
Oh my. Yeah, I can hear my art history teacher now being like, really, bitch?
Oh, you think this is hard? Wait until you listen to the episode. That's this. You're twisting on the line right now, but the future you is screaming it in your ear right now.
What are you doing, you idiot?
Sarah, don't do this.
Oh my God.
Not in front of Dawn. Not in front of Dawn.
I'm so embarrassed. Oh, I need to drink more.
It helps me. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna pass. Don't be Googling it. I see you Google.
Dave, were you
Googling your phone?
Girl, were you Googling
my
it?
mother-in-law.
Oh, well, that's, I don't know.
Because she was there that night.
She's picking up my daughter and she's thumbs up emojiing me. She's just like, yes. She's like,
okay,
she's
good.
like, we're on our way home.
Okay, there's the proof.
Like,
all right.
Okay, I'm still recording, and she's just like, boop.
That's good.
I didn't think she knew how to do something like that.
That's nice. I feel like Pornhub and mother-in-laws are the only green light cell phone use.
I would never use my phone during a cuck session. I'm very sorry.
Yes.
Okay, we appreciate you. So she's given it to you, Dave? Do you know who made the famous engraving of the Boston Massacre?
I want to say it's got to be somebody just ridiculous and like well known in history, like a Sam Adams or even a Paul Revere. I mean, Paul Revere made a lot of weird shit, but I don't think he was a painter. I don't know. Sam Adams makes beer.
This is fun. Watching the
Yeah.
insides of your mind. It's like a striptease. It's like a mental striptease, watching you
Yeah.
slowly take off the
didn't-
layers.
It's an etching, so
Didn't
it was
Paul Revere make
printed in the
spoons? Didn't he
paper,
invent the spoon?
and it was like printed.
You know what? Fuck it. I'm going with Paul Revere.
Dave, I'm going to give you a point for that one, Dave, because it is Paul. It's sort of a trick question, because buckle up for this one. You're right that famous engraving that we all had in our textbooks was made by Paul Revere. Ding, ding, ding. However, Paul Revere fucking stole it
True Revere.
from honest to God. From total revered this. The guy was named Henry Pelham. He was also a printer in Boston.
Look
Were
how
you
mad Sarah-
gonna say
Yeah,
it,
Sarah's
Sarah?
a
Were
big
you gonna
Henry
say
Pelham
it?
fan. Big. She has all Henry Pelham's paintings in her fucking
Now
house.
that you said Pelham,
Yeah.
now that you said Pelham, I'm like, that's
Yeah.
the fucking name.
No,
That's the name.
There.
Because it's a big like
Sarah
Ipswich
has all
Wenham
a
name,
he-
Pelham, and they have
Sarah
everything
has all
named
of
after him.
Pelham's older works hanging in her house.
The older work.
Yeah.
You know what? You'll never forget now. Sarah, here's my theory.
Yeah.
I really believe
I'll never
that
forget.
my guests and or listeners will someday win millions of dollars on some sort of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire trivia show. And I like to think that I'm part of that. You will never forget Henry Pelham again. And
I will never.
And here's what's great. What's nuts is that it was like a drama and just sort of like shyster fuckery, because Henry Pelham made that engraving, guys. If you put Henry Pelham's engraving next to Paul Revere's, he made only a few small changes and put it to print and got the jump on Henry, to the point where Henry like wrote him a letter that you can read, that I have read because that was like, buddy, fuck you. I'm paraphrasing.
To whom it may concern, goeth and fuck yourself. Right? Something like that.
He did. He was like, this is a profession. He was like, I made that work. I gave it to a guy to have printed, and he gave it to you, and you stole it.
What was Paul Revere's little change? Was it the adding of the dog?
Oh, there's a few. Oh, Dave, I'm so glad. Listen,
Paul
if
Revere's
I'm
like,
reaching
I'm going
across,
to
I'm
put a
bringing.
little puppy dog here.
Yeah. Right. I'm taking you off your voyeur chair and I'm bringing you into the sack with us here, Dave. He kept the dog. I'm telling you, the dog was Henry's. Okay, but the changes that Paul made were slight. Like if you just glanced at them, you wouldn't know they were two different things. Like he straight up stole this thing. Okay. But he did make some changes. And they're interesting. One is the moon. There's like a crescent moon in the sky, and in Pelham's, it's facing to the right, and in Revere's, it's facing to the left. The church in the background has 8 columns in the cupola, and Revere's only has 7. There's a smoking chimney on Pelham's that doesn't show up on Revere's. But the most like significant difference is that Pelham included under the engraving a quote from Psalms. That is generally the gist of it is, oh God, the injustice. Oh God, avenge us. Oh God, we have been wronged. Our blood runs in the street. And it's taken from Psalms. Revere doesn't use the Bible verse. He writes his own poem about injustice and blood in the streets. And he names names like Thomas Preston, the faithless Thomas Preston shot upon us on King Street. So this isn't like hearkening to a biblical verse, like he's making it specific. So it is what Paul Revere does to that engraving makes it more insidious. And he calls it the Massacre in Boston. The Bloody Massacre is the title of it, right? But that's not all. It goes with words, because at this same time, keep in mind, all while these engravings, that engraving Henry Pelham made, he made on the night of March 5th. Fucking Paul Revere stole it like the next day, 2 days later. I mean, this shit is fucking like, we are talking 250 years ago, but the media machine is doing what the media machine do. And it is getting ahead of this. It is spinning this. It is labeling this. No one, quote unquote, significant fired on these men, right? No one, quote unquote, significant died. So the shooting itself, it's like everyone's trying to sort of lift up what it was symbolically, like from, the very beginning. And in addition to this image, there are pamphlets pamphlets. Can we get hot for pamphlets? We're going to try. Okay.
Ooh, that trifold. Yeah.
Pamphlets. I mean,
Hear
like,
ye, hear ye.
Yeah,
I didn't pay my taxes for this paper, so fuck it them.
yeah, I wrote it on a free piece of bark, imperialist shits. Yeah, and we still, 2023, man, we're still dropping pamphlets on places when we're in a bind. Like, it's just what people do to fucking get the word out immediately, presuming a certain amount of literacy, presuming that even if everyone can't read this, someone's going to read it to them, that this is the fastest way to spread it.
I love how history just never changes. It never changes.
Man.
Like, let's drop pamphlets.
No.
It's 2023. We're still dropping pamphlets.
Pamphlets, yeah. Hear ye,
amazing.
hear ye. It's just like heads up.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. And same to your point, Dave, it's not just their pamphlets. This on opposite sides, the pamphlet that the Sons of Liberty put out is titled A Short Narrative of the Horrid Massacre in Boston, perpetrated in the evening of the 5th day of March, 1770, by soldiers of the 29th Regiment. And it includes Paul Revere's engraving with it. Okay.
That's a snappy title.
Snappy. Horrid.
Rolls
Horrid.
right off the
Horrid
tongue.
massacre.
Yeah.
Horrid.
And,
right?
and it says the first word, a short narrative. This shit is long as fuck and much longer than the other pamphlet that is published at the same time by the British and the Loyalists, who titled their pamphlet A Fair Account of the Late Unhappy Disturbance. I swear to Jesus, and there are no pictures.
To be fair.
A fair
like,
account.
geez.
They literally almost say fair and balanced. So these two pamphlets obviously take very different paths. Obviously, they're explaining what had happened out there in front of that custom house with entirely different perspectives. Sarah, this question is to you.
Oh,
I have to. I'm throwing you
All
bones here, girl.
I know.
Dave and I are half
Yeah,
naked. You're still getting your socks off, sister.
I'm tickling my own feet with this feather.
Sorry, it's cold. I'm cold.
It's cold. Yeah. It's like, can I just turn one light on?
Who's in the chair now, Sarah?
Okay.
That's fine. I'm tired. I need to hydrate real quick. Hold on.
It's this wheat. Oh. All right. So here is the question. These pamphlets, both of them, were printed in Boston, but were most widely read and distributed somewhere else. Where?
I'm gonna say England. That's what I'm gonna go.
Ding,
with.
ding, 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 ding.
Let me take them off.
Yeah,
suck it. Yeah.
The bra pings, knocks a lamp over. We're back in business. Absolutely correct. Sarah, well done. It was in England and in London in particular. These pamphlets, as a matter of fact, a short narrative of the horrid massacre in Boston, perpetrated on the evening of the 5th day of March, 1770, by the soldiers of the 29th Regiment pamphlet, was actually not distributed in Boston much at all.
What?
Even though both of them contain tons of eyewitness testimony. I mean, they meticulously interviewed all the eyewitnesses and, of course, gathered all the most insidious and terrible descriptions of what happened and went to all this work and didn't distribute it. It wasn't like forbidden in Boston. People in Boston certainly read it, but they didn't want to taint the jury pool. Even then, they were like, this is going to be the jury, and this town has a lot of loyalists in it. They really didn't want the fight to kick up again, but they really wanted to convince the people in London of their perspective. And this is another one where you talk about why it's important to sort of slow down and shine a light on the Boston Massacre. And remember that in 1770, two really important things to explain why these pamphlets would have been sent to London first. One is we're not at war. These soldiers who perpetrated this act were peacekeepers, there to guard a custom house from being looted and to just make sure that the people who were there to enforce the tax law were protected. That's their only job. So that makes sense why we have to explain how and when. If it was a war, you don't bother with that shit. It's a war. We're in trenches. We're fucking shooting at each other. This isn't a war. So we got to be super careful about how we explain this. One. Two is we're not America yet. We are a colony of Britain. Okay. And one of the things that means in short is this is King George III's court holding King George III's soldiers accountable for acts they perpetrated on King George III's subjects. And that is the landscape as we look at it in October as these trials start up in 1770. And that also means, and this is where it starts to get like vertigo to even think about it from our point in history now, is that the king's lawyer is then defending the king's subjects. So the prosecution in this case is also wearing a white wig and is also serves the king as he persecutes the king's soldiers for acting out of line at the same time that we have the king's lawyers. It's, I mean, it'll make you nauseous if you think about it too long, because you have to go, but it's why when you go, why would they send it to London? Who gives a, that's why. Yeah. So the trial comes in October and the trial is called Rex versus Preston. And for the defense, our founding daddy, John Adams, who, of course, played by Paul Giamatti in the HBO series and in my head. and this is a big deal that John Adams takes the case to defend the British soldiers. I've heard it argued both ways. Again, with our perspective in history, it's easy to be like, he did it. They won. It was great. But like, he was in trouble. Like, it is dangerous. People were getting dragged out of their homes and tarred and feathered for just buying too much tea from an English guy, you know?
Right.
So to defend them in court, it wasn't like that people were going to be awesome about it. And a lot of other lawyers turned it down. And John Adams like, there's a reason why we like this, why we loft this guy as one of our heroes. He did it for noble reasons, right? He's risking his career, his personal safety to defend despised British soldiers who killed 5 patriots in his town, okay? And what he does, though, in taking that is start to plant a flag in the notion that we, the colonies, are reasoned. And we have a rule of law here, that we are not a savage mob that throws rocks and oyster shells at soldiers. We can take that breath, that important breath, and then can act reasonably and look at what's fair. And Thomas Preston is tried separately. So his trial starts in October, 7 months after the shooting, and he is acquitted pretty quickly. And everyone was like, whoa, that's crazy. That's awesome. And no one was more shocked than Thomas Preston that he was not found guilty of murder. They just couldn't prove by eyewitnesses or anybody who would swear by it that he gave an order to fire. Didn't happen. And primarily, John Adams had to prove to everybody in that room that engraving was fucking wrong. The engraving has Thomas Preston, who is named, of course, in the poem that Paul Revere writes, standing behind the troops with his sword up, yelling fucking fire, right? And all of the eyewitnesses are like, he was standing in front of his men, urging them not to fire. It wouldn't have happened that way. There were all of these eyewitnesses. He had some friends on the jury, so it was like, Now, the 8 soldiers who have to come to trial next, they come up about a month later, and they're like, fuckity fuckerton, because the only chance we fucking had is that we were following orders. So if they've already said that we weren't given an order, that the dude never gave an order, what are we supposed to say? How are we supposed to explain why all of us fired? And they've already established, and they even kind of tried to throw Thomas Preston under the bus And a bunch of them write a letter to the judge. It's like, he totally told us to fire.
Yeah, I don't know. I just he told me.
Yeah, he did. He totally did. And the court's like, nah, mate, you're all gonna have to do it too. And so they all stand trial, and our guy John Adams, with a whole new jury, just as unlikely as the previous time, maybe even more unlikely this time, successfully defends these guys. And his defense of the soldiers is artful. I can't say it's entirely noble, but it is artful. And here's why. He essentially defends them on the basis of self-defense. They fired because their lives were in danger. And if they hadn't fired, they would have died. And the soldiers had tried to kind of use a self-defense, which was, we were ordered to fire, therefore we had to, because you, colonials, with the execution of Richard Ames, among others, have seen what happens to us if we don't follow orders. You know how brutalized we are as redcoats by our own captains. And if we hadn't fired...
Either way, you're set up for failure. It's either you get fucked by your people or you get fucked by the colonialists. Like, totally. Either way, you're screwed.
And that was their primary defense, right? And John Adams lifted up that defense without saying they were ordered to fire. Just these guys were defending their lives. But to do that, he has to argue that the mob was going to kill him to a jury of Bostonians that don't want to paint the city of Boston as scary, mobbish people that throw stones at soldiers who so he is walking a very thin line. And one of those first victims I mentioned early on was this formerly enslaved man named Crispus Attucks. We don't know a ton about him. If he had not died this day, we would have known absolutely nothing about him, because as was the case for a lot of people, but especially a lot of Black people, there just were no records taken. What few we had just were never ever written down. It wasn't even that they were lost. They were just never made. We believe he was mixed race, either Black and white or possibly Black and Native American. And John Adams uses the presence of all these teenage boys, sort of the 11-year-old boy who died before this, but definitely the 17-year-old boy who was killed during the massacre. And then, if you remember, the other guy I said was Irish, who died a couple weeks later, he was shot in the belly. Even though these victims had had these hugely celebrated funerals where they were marched, thousands showed up, their caskets were engraved on with skulls and crossbones on the cover of the newspaper, and they were allowed to get the people originally riled up in their defense. John Adams sort of turns it and describes them as a mob, a motley rabble of saucy boys, Negroes and mulattoes, Irish teagues, and outlandish jactars. And that they were so violent and so crazy, and they were acting unjustly. And that was why the soldiers, had to defend themselves. And when he started to sense that the jury was like, yeah, but they're my guy. That's my mob. They're from my town, Those are my dudes. Those are my guys. And we're not really comfortable with saying that, right? John Adams says to the jury, quote, "The sun is not about to stand still or go out, nor the rivers to dry up, because there was a mob in Boston the 5th of March that attacked a party of soldiers." Instead, he argues that that's what happens when you have a bunch of soldiers in a town trying to keep the peace in peacetime, when there's no war. And even though he others the mob and he says, because when you have a situation like that, idiots like the victims are going to act the way they're going to act. And the reason why I say this is that beautiful, artful legal argument, but not terribly noble, is because it does effectively say you got to let these soldiers go, and it's nobody's fault what happened. But if there is going to be fault, it's that the system is broken, and all these soldiers should go back to England where they belong. Right?
Yeah, it's a good point.
It is peacetime.
Yeah.
It's peacetime. Why are they here?
It's peacetime. It's peacetime. And with that, I have another question, which goes to Dave.
Oh.
Okay. There were acquittals, but not all of the soldiers were acquitted. 2 of them were found guilty of manslaughter. What was their punishment? This is multiple choice. A.
All right.
Okay, so the 2 that were found guilty of manslaughter, did they A, sit in the stocks in Boston Common for 3 days and 3 nights? Did they B, work without pay 1 month for a local colonial magistrate? C, get branded with the letter M? Or D, get sent back to their original base in Nova Scotia? Which we can all agree is a punishment by any measure.
Yeah.
Yes, especially in March.
Exactly.
Yeah.
or October,
Anytime.
whenever. That's just terrible.
unless it's like August 8th, it's probably pretty bad.
Yeah. Right.
Yes, that's it.
I'm going to go A.
Sit in the stocks in Boston Common.
That way,
Okay.
Bostonians can go over there and kick them in the ass while they're in the
Their
stocks.
favorite thing to do, right? Exactly. Right? Okay, great. I'm afraid that is incorrect. And in the spirit of love and unity, Sarah, do you want to stab at this question for a chance to get a second point and therefore be in a tie with Dave? So we know they didn't sit in the stocks. Did they work with a month without pay, get branded with the letter M, or get sent back to Nova Scotia?
I'm going to go with get sent back to Nova Scotia.
I'm afraid not. They were branded, you guys. They branded their thumbs with the letter M.
Well, they're not going to be put to work. Their tiny, frail British hands aren't going to pick up anything heavy.
Well, not even now that they're branded. Like,
That's right.
there was a sense of
That's
hope
right.
there.
I could hardly hold my quill. Yeah, that's a good point, Dave.
I do declare.
But isn't that kind of badass too? And don't you think that it would have been better to brand them with the letter B instead of M?
Like the Red Sox B, like the one on my hat right now.
That's what I'm saying.
It's like, yeah.
Because like murderer is like, ooh, that's tough. Like, don't fuck with me. I murdered a guy.
You know what?
How you
I
doing?
didn't even think of
How you
murderer.
doing?
I thought M for massacre. Honestly.
You know what?
I didn't even think of murderer.
There you go.
No. It's too bad they didn't brand him like MF. So it's just like, motherfucker.
I bet there was probably
motherfucking douchebag.
I would like to know who got to do the branding, because that's an important question, I think.
Well, I'm sure some poor guy did the branding, but Paul Revere fucking took the credit for it. Yeah.
Fuck
Gather
you.
around. I invented the spoon, I think.
I think that's one of the more overlooked things that you've said, Dave, is like, he invented the spoon. I don't know. I'm going to look that up. If he did, I'm going to apologize personally, but I feel like what were we fucking doing with our soup until Paul Revere came around? What the hell were we thinking?
Just palming it.
Yeah, out of a shoe.
Yeah.
Yeah, you put it in a
out of the
shoe,
shoe.
and you drink out of a shoe.
Okay. Well, you two are both from Boston. I defer to you, of course, in all things. I want to come to make a quick note before we jump back in about this guy, Crispus Attucks, because what a fascinating rabbit hole of history the Boston Massacre was in general, but the victims and the way they were treated. Because Crispus Attucks is a Black man, as I said, we wouldn't have known so much of his personal story had he not been involved in this. It's fascinating to me because there was another famous engraving of the Boston Massacre that was done in the 1840s. And this is, of course, as abolition is starting to brew. It's about 20 years before the official start of the Civil War, which is in 1861. But abolitionists, much like the Sons of Liberty, are trying to generate images and icons and artistic representations of things that can motivate a group of people politically. And just like Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War harkens back to our founding fathers to do that, to find this time of origin in history when he says 77 years ago, our fathers, right? Big deal at the Gettysburg Address. Similarly, before that, they were also going back to the founding fathers to like get us through the Civil War. And they do this revamp of the engraving that looks again at a glance like the one we all recognize with the church in the back and the red coats and the colonials. But Crispus Attucks is front and center. He is in the center of that photo, and he is dying boldly. And one of the things that sort of went along with that was a statement, very articulated, that Black people that a Black person was the first blood shed in the revolution to free our country from British oppression. And in the 60s, Dr. Martin Luther King said, school children know that Crispus Attucks, a Black man, was there from the very first moment, shedding his blood for this cause. And at first I thought that was just very interesting. The beginning and sort of what I consider not really the end, but like another pinpoint of who Crispus Attucks sort of became in our cultural identity. But I didn't realize that there were actually all these peaks and valleys to Crispus between those 2 points. So if you are absorbing this story, and as we all know, history is what you ate for breakfast. It's not just distant, it's right next to you. So if your history was on March 6th, 1770, Crispus Attucks is a noble citizen of Boston, unfairly murdered. And he is his casket is on the cover of the paper, and he is marched in a funeral attended by thousands. No other Black or mixed race man would have had an honored funeral down the streets of Boston in almost any other given scenario. So in that day, he is a hero. November of 1770, when John Adams is talking to the jury, he's not just a mulatto thug gang, part of a mob that any reasonable person could understand why you would fire upon them, because he was there, because he was one of the faces of the mob, justified the murder itself. So just from March to November, he flips from one to the other. But then between 1771 and 1783, that's between the Boston Massacre and the end of the Revolutionary War, they have on March 5th every year an anniversary of the Boston Massacre that gets bigger and bigger and bigger every year. And the victims are held up, and it's every year. And as soon as we win the Revolutionary War, done. We stop having those parades, and we stop talking about that stuff, and it's completely over. And it's Crispus who, and your textbooks and your art and your engravings aren't going to talk about any of them, least of all Crispus Attucks. Until 1840, he's put right in the middle of that engraving, and is reminded of how much a cornerstone of our American history he is. I found not only that a fascinating nugget to this story, but illuminating to us on how we too tend to oppress and regurgitate various figures depending on the engraving that we're making or we're stealing, or we're using to make a mob,
Or a spoon.
Or a spoon, because he invented the spoon.
Allegedly.
Gather round and you shall hear the bullshit life of Paul Revere's fucking guy. This is just a little nugget I wanted to give to you guys, because I do plan on coming out to visit my sister. I will be knocking on your door, and I really, really want to drink to excess and then go to the tourist, the most tourist. I will allow you guys to tell me the cheesiest, touristy. I want my guide to have a costume.
Oh, I got the perfect guy for you.
I want
He's a regular at the bar I work at.
Great. I want an actor.
Yeah.
I want someone who's going to try to do an accent.
Yep.
And when we go, this is the question I want us to ask this guy. Okay, because this is like a hidden nugget in the history. So during the trial, John Adams and the defense call as a witness a woman named Jane Crothers. She's just a lady, kind of like Crispus. We wouldn't have known shit about her. We know very little about her before or after this, except that she was fucking talking to Private Hugh White before he hit that kid with the gun, and she watched the whole thing happen, and she saw it all. So she was like a really valuable witness. She was very, very key in saying, yeah, Thomas Preston was not standing behind them, ordering them to fire like the engraving said. Like, she was so important. And given that she was under oath, that her testimony was so important, she also says that during the whole thing, there was a mysterious man dressed in a black, dark cloak standing behind the soldiers, quote, encouraging them to fire, saying, "Fire, by God, I'll stand by you." And you guys saw all these books and all this shit I read and listened to. I have never heard fucking anything about this mysterious man in a black cloak. And this is hardly rumor. This is testimony under oath from a witness we trust. And the transcript of Thomas Preston's trial is gone entirely. We don't have any of his court testimony. The only transcripts we have are little pieces from the soldiers, and that part's in there. Who the fuck was it? What the fuck was that?
Introduction to the Illuminati?
Right? That's, girl, I'm saying, if conspiracy shit curls your toes.
Oh, and it does in this show. Ooh.
Yeah.
Sarah and I are big
conspiracies.
conspiracies.
That was my bone for you guys. I wanted to, as everybody came and we've smoked our cigarette, so you know that it wasn't just a cheap one night stand, but I really know you and I really care about you. I thought, I'm going to close this one up with a mysterious, conspiracy-ridden mystery.
I'm ready to go again already. Let me just get that sandwich.
Oh my God. I need a nap.
That, my dear friends, is the hilfing of the Boston Massacre. Holy hot fuck.
Wow.
And I would like to congratulate Dave. Against all odds, you have won the contest. But you should feel still, it was only with 2 points. There were a lot of questions. I asked you guys 7 questions. You got 2. Sarah, you got 1. But how glad are you got 1?
I got 1.
Yeah.
That's all you need is 1. Just to get on the board.
That's all I need.
Yeah.
Just there. You know, I'm the first loser. Second place, first loser.
Ooh. Oh, nobody loses in a menage a trois. Everybody comes in third, you know, so to speak.
Oh, the show is great.
So good.
That was a blast. And they're great. Sarah Retalic and Dave Houghton of In a Pickle Radio. You can find them, subscribe to their podcast. They are everywhere you're currently listening to me. Or you can just click their link in our show notes. Now, in our next dive into the annals of history, the hilfing of infamous occultist Aleister Crowley. He was a favorite of Led Zeppelin and the Beatles and L. Ron Hubbard, and wow, what a fascinating prick this guy is. Oh, and I'll be joined by the celebrated chef, Hyla Johnson, who has cooking shows, has written several cookbooks, and is an absolute joy to hilf with. Until then, our theme song was composed and performed by Kat Perkins. A reminder that you can find my sources, links to the books, documentaries, and articles I reference in the summary of this episode or by emailing us, hilfpodcast@gmail.com, or messaging us on social media @hilfpodcast. This has been Hilf, History I'd Like to Fuck with Dawn Brody. I'm Dawn Brody, reminding you that history is a party, and everybody's coming.